Serious, what's something creepy that has happened to you that you still occasionally think about to this day? When I was around 11, I was at softball practice, and for whatever reason the practice ended early, so I had to wait at the park for my grandpa to come and pick me up. I ended up having to wait alone for about 30 minutes because I didn't have a cell phone to call and tell my grandpa that practice ended early. I remember sitting on the swings when an adult man, in his 30s or 40s, came and sat down next to me. He asked if he knew me and I said no, and he told me that I must just have one of those pretty faces that feel recognizable to anybody. I remember feeling happy about the compliment and I kept talking to him. Eventually, he told me that he had his car with him and that he could drive me home to my grandparents' house so that they didn't have to worry about picking me up and I wouldn't have to wait any longer. Being 11, I didn't think anything of this and proceeded to get into this stranger's car. Luckily, my grandpa showed up just in time and I remember seeing his car and jumping out to meet him. The stranger sped off without talking to my grandpa, and that was the last I ever heard about it. This is such a vivid memory for me, and I often find myself thinking about what would have happened to me and what a different person I would be today if my grandpa hadn't shown up when he did. Smoking a blunt with the fucker who had raped and murdered a friend of mine the previous evening. We were all hypothesizing what had happened while the psycho who had done it was casually trying to plant disinformation. Pretty sure I almost got kidnapped when I was a kid. I was 10 years old walking home from school and an elderly couple driving by stopped and asked me for directions. They were looking for the street I was walking towards, so I pointed them in that direction. Even though my directions were very clear, both were acting confused and asked if I can get in the car and guide them there and then they would drive me home. I told them it was fine, my house was right here. I lied. They were pressuring/guilting me a lot and being too nice about wanting to drive me home. It gave me a really weird feeling in my stomach. So I pretended to walk towards a house that wasn't mine and they drove off. Suicide trigger warning, this happened when I was 7. I was walking downtown with my dad who was buying a CD. We used to go to the record store and he'd chat music with the workers and I'd play on the Sega Dreamcast. I remember there was a guy watching me play and it looked like he was crying. He was just kind of staring at me. But because I was 7 and had vidya, I didn't think much of it. About 20 minutes later there was a bunch of people gathering outside, so we went out to see what the commotion was about. The guy who was crying was now on top of the roof standing on the ledge. He screamed, "This is for you, Daniel," my name, and jumped. My dad put his entire body over mine to prevent me from seeing it, but the guy who jumped died. I thought about it every day for over 20 years. Skip ahead to about 5 years ago, I'm now at a Christmas staff party, drinking heavily with my team. A guy on said team and I have heart-to-hearts about our pasts, and he tells me that he is bisexual. However, he hasn't been with a man in 20 years. He used to date a man behind his girlfriend's back, who committed suicide when he wouldn't leave her. Co-worker's name is Daniel. He was in the crowd with me. Two strangers forever changed together, but 20 years in the past. This may not be creepy to some, but it haunted me for most of my life. When I was 10 years old I lived in the middle of rural Alabama. We had some odd neighbors. Being curious kids, my friend and I followed my neighbor and his son and daughter one day when they left their house and walked into the woods. I was very familiar with the area because it was back when kids could roam free until the street lights came on. Anyway, we trailed them for about 2 miles, through the woods, across an old cemetery, and down a railroad. They stopped at a clearing beside the tracks and my friend and I hid opposite of them and watched. They started digging and kept pulling up bones and putting them in a bucket. We got scared and bolted. I immediately told my parents but they didn't believe me. I'm 32 and remember that day clearly. Edit, I forgot to come back to this. Had some major life changes lately. I didn't expect this to get such a response. Thank you all. After reading the comments, I would like to add. This happened in very rural Talladega County around 1999. The neighbor dad wasn't someone you'd expect to have a high school diploma at first glance. I remember him not being too kind to his kids sometimes. After thinking more about that time, weirdest of all that hit me, there was never a mom. Again, that's just my 10-year-old's memory. I moved into a shared house and my housemate told me half the house had burned down and been rebuilt, and the ghost of the old man who died in the fire visited them. I never had any experience of the old man, but when half asleep I'd very clearly feel a cat or two jump onto my bed, settle down and purr. It happened often, it was quite chilled out and I didn't mind. I would hear the distinctive thump of a cat jumping off the bed from time to time, but there was never a physical cat there. Once in that house, but a different bedroom, I had a terrifying lucid dream in which a possum, cat-like hand, claw was coming up from inside of my bed, clawing my thigh. It hurt so much I thought I might be gouging myself in my sleep, but woke up unharmed. Months later I moved out and met the landlord, who lived a few doors down. To return keys etc. I said something like must have been scary when the house burned down, killed the owner, were they living here at the time? He said oh no, the owner was fine, he got out. But he had about a dozen cats and several of them died in the fire. I'm pretty sure I was sharing my bed with ghost cats. Not sure what the story was with the dream, but I've had a couple of lucid dreams in my time and they have always been incredibly scary. I was camping in the Simpson Desert on a multi-day trip. It was a very remote location. We hadn't planned on stopping at this point, but it was getting late and one of the trailers had blown a tire, so we decided to repair it and then call it a day. Being so remote, there aren't any signs for anything, but according to our map the land we were on was military, probably for training and stuff. We didn't think much of it at the time, but I dare say we shouldn't have been there. Anyways, it did add to the eerie, remote and desolate feeling in the area. I remember after dinner we were all stargazing. There were so many meteorites and satellites whizzing around, it was fantastic. I remember watching one satellite move, very slowly, much slower than the rest. Then I noticed another, not far from it, moving very slowly in the same direction. I pointed it out to the group and we were all watching these two slow satellites almost follow each other. Then the first one just made this hard right turn, and we were all like WTH. Then the one behind it did the same thing. And they continued to follow each other before both turning again. It really fucked with me, I couldn't explain it at the time. And it was so bizarre, I have no idea what it was. I'm not one to put much heat into conspiracies or aliens or the like, but it fucked with me for sure. The only logical conclusion I can come to, and it does help me sleep a little better at night, is that they were geostationary satellites changing altitudes/orbits? But I'm no space expert, that's the best I have come up with. I have no clue what I saw that night. I commented this on a different Ask Reddit some time ago. I was probably 11 or 12. There was a telephone pole in our backyard that stood in the middle of our back fence. An electrician was working on it and needed access to our backyard for a couple days. One of the nights, my best friend was over for a sleepover, and we were in the fort we made in my room. I was facing toward her, away from my bedroom door, and she gets startled and lets put kind of a half-hearted scream/yelp. She said she thought for a split second she saw a man's face peering between the sheets through the entrance to our fort. We both felt really creeped out the rest of the night but just fell asleep eventually. The next day or so my family realized that 2 of our motor scooters we kept in the back were missing, and sometime later my dad recognized the electrician on Sacramento's Top 10 Wanted. I'm pretty sure that night was the night he stole the scooters, and he must have come inside the house through the back door and left or something when he realized we were awake. When I was in 3rd grade, I was home alone with my quadriplegic grandma from after school until my mom came home. One day the phone rings, and I answer it and an unfamiliar man's voice says, "Hey, just own more bite, did you just get home from school?" I say, "Yeah, who is this?" Instead of answering me he started asking things like, "Do you ever touch yourself? Do you like to look at girls?" Being in 3rd grade, of course I was like, "Nope." And hung up pretty quick. I told my parents but nothing ever came of it. I still wonder to this day who it was, how they knew my name, and my whereabouts. This was back on a corded landline with no caller ID either. Edit, forgot words.